Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, a place to find connection, a sense of belonging, and community, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young, licensed clinical social worker. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. This is a weekly podcast where we explore how sensitivity weaves itself into our lives. We talk about the richness that it adds, the strengths we have because of our sensitivity, and some of the challenges it poses as well. Sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers. This is episode 16. Thank you so much for being here today. Today I talk with Christina Miglino. We talk about the relationship between courage and vulnerability. What is vulnerability? Why would you want to be vulnerable? What makes it difficult to be vulnerable? Christina talks about how shame can inhibit vulnerability and how to call our power back. Brene Brown talks about you can't have courage without vulnerability. Can you ever think of a time when you were courageous and you didn't have uncertainty, risk, or emotional exposure? So I want to tell on myself a little bit. I did this interview with Christina before the podcast even launched, and I had an idea in my mind of what I wanted the interview to look like. And this was one of the first few interviews that I did. We did the interview, and because I had this expectation about what I wanted it to look like and it didn't look that way, I just kind of shelved it and I really left it and wasn't even planning on airing it until recently. I have a couple of interviews that I did that I just haven't edited. And so I thought, well, let me pull it out and listen to it. And it's an incredibly rich and wonderful interview. And because I had this expectation of what I wanted, I really missed the opportunity to see what was there in the moment. And as I was listening back to it and editing it, I realized a couple times she's really vulnerable with me. And because I had an agenda, it prevented me from really reflecting in the moment that she was sharing some pretty vulnerable and tender things with me. And I didn't even respond to her about it. I bring this to your attention because I think that this is common, that we have an idea of what we want things to look like, and we often miss the gifts that we're getting in the moment. I did follow up with Christina and sent her an email and let her know exactly what I'm telling you, and I apologized. I just like to use all the little stumbling blocks that I have in my life to kind of demonstrate that we all have blind spots. We all have things where we maybe don't show up exactly as we want to. We expect one thing, we get another. In the moment, I felt like it really wasn't a great interview. And then when I listened back to it, I don't know, I think it's a pretty great interview. I'd love to get your feedback. I always want to hear from you. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive@gmail.com. Let me tell you a little bit about Christina. Christina Miglino is a soul catalyst, shamanic practitioner, and artist who's traveled all over the U.S. and Canada as a teacher, healer, and public speaker. She's hosted and taught many workshops on personal power, leadership, and emotional intelligence. Christina is passionate about supporting people in up-leveling their soul's ascension process. She currently has open enrollment for her 9-month group program called The Sea Within, for visionary souls seeking to activate their creativity and soul's potential. For more information about the program, please send her an email. And there are links in the show notes for all the ways you can get in touch with Christina, and there are links to the notes and the things that I mentioned already about Brene Brown. All right, and on to the show. Hey, Christina, welcome.
Hi, Patricia. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so glad to have you here. I heard you on another podcast and just was so kind of charmed by your story that I reached out to you to see if you'd come and talk with my folks.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for reaching out.
Oh, you're so welcome. So we're going to start with my standard questions that I ask everybody, and then we'll give you a chance to talk about what you're here to talk about. How's that sound?
Sounds wonderful.
Do you identify as an HSP?
Oh, most definitely. Yes, I sure do.
Okay. When did you learn you were a highly sensitive person?
Well, it's a good question. I've felt it since I was really young. And I think as I got older, I really started to have some language for that and probably identified as an HSP, I would say more concretely in my 20s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What do you think of the term highly sensitive person?
I have mixed feelings about it.
Do tell.
Yeah. On the one hand, I love owning it because I think that it's really important because I do think we have these superpowers that come with being highly sensitive. And on the other hand, it can be a little tricky for those in the world who are not to understand, like, why do you have to identify as that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, that's where it gets a little bit tricky because I'm like, well, I know I'm this. For example, my partner really isn't in the same way I am. He is sensitive, but it's not in the same way, right? So he's kind of like, well, come on, like, what's your problem, you know? And I'm like, it's not a problem. It's just who I am, and I feel everything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So
How do you think the terms highly sensitive person is perceived by others?
I think that it can be perceived as weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be perceived, and this is kind of old school, to be honest. Like, we need to be letting go of, feeling emotions, having anything to do with not being strong or being able to have strength, but it's kind of an old thought pattern that I know that we lean on. And so sometimes I think there's people that just haven't ever been introduced to why sensitivity could just be this miraculous, beautiful way of being in the world, and really does afford us these incredible natural gifts that we sometimes don't even realize we have because we're stuck in that pattern of, oh, am I weak? Oh, am I not like other people because I'm so sensitive?
Mm-hmm. Do you wish that there was another term that was used? And if so, what would that be?
Well, I will tell you that my response to that is that I don't, in general, I like less boxes. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I like to be who I am and be unique and be empowered by these different aspects of who I am, but I'm less likely to be the person who fights to be a label. But I totally get why it's necessary. I don't know what the word would be.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you feel about being a highly sensitive person?
I feel pretty great about it at this point in my life, although it doesn't mean that I sometimes don't come up against this sense that I'm different. Yeah, so I feel like I own it more than ever, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. It seems to me, too, that for those of us that are entrepreneurs, we end up creating lifestyles that really support and nurture us. And so I think it becomes less of a hindrance because we're not dealing with corporations and coworkers. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that is totally right on. I think I've noticed since I've become an entrepreneur, which, my whole life I've really been an entrepreneur. Like, I've really been a visionary who should go off and make their own work. And to be honest, like, the highly sensitive part of me was a big alert system saying, you don't really fit the model, right? Of like the 9-to-5er who's hustling to make ends meet. And it's true. Once I really allowed myself to fall into the entrepreneur pattern of creating my own work, I got to see that me being highly sensitive means that I do need breaks. It means that I do need time alone. It means that I need to pay attention to my energy systems when maybe other people don't, but I do. So it's cool because I get to own my schedule and make time for the things that actually really do matter and really allow me to perform really well, and to be my best self in my work.
Mm-hmm. I hadn't ever made the connection between being a highly sensitive person before and the fact that I've only worked 2 full-time jobs in my life.
Mm-hmm.
I've supported myself since I needed to start supporting myself a long time ago, but I've been really blessed to have jobs where I made enough money and they were not positions where I needed to work full-time,
Mm-hmm.
even up until becoming a social worker or being in private practice. And I really hadn't made that connection to that really serves being a highly sensitive person. And Dr. Elaine Aron says HSPs make great entrepreneurs and it really can serve their lifestyle needs.
That's so cool. Yeah. I think you're right. It's interesting. I've had a different experience. My experience has been that I have always like hustled too hard. Like I've had a full-time job and maybe 2 part-time jobs.
Oh my gosh.
Like I've just gone hard because in my family, I learned that really early on. Like I was born into a poor family. We weren't always super low income, but I was born into that. And so I think I learned that you have to hustle, you have to work really, really hard to make ends meet. And so what I've noticed is a lot of physical like body breakdown because of that. So it's like the extreme, right? I'm highly sensitive and I've like pushed myself to a level that is totally unhealthy work-wise.
So what happens in your body? What does a breakdown look like? So maybe other people that aren't aware of this is what could be because of too much. What does that look like for you?
So for me, it often does look like a migraine. I've talked to you a bit about this, Patricia, before we started recording, just that I've had migraines since I was 5 years old. And I think they're totally related to being a highly sensitive person. I think they're totally related to being the first child in my family, being born to 2 incredible people, but who also had a lot of differences. So I remember putting myself between my parents at a very young age, wanting to stop the fighting at 5, and I think I took on a lot for my family. So a lot of the breakdowns look like I'll start to feel a migraine coming on and go, okay, well, I've pushed myself too hard. Really apparent when that happens.
Yeah. Interesting. Any other physical symptoms that you get?
I would say like fatigue. Sometimes I can get a little bit of what feels like depression. And I would say I was much more of an anxious, depressed teenager. I've learned over time to work with those things because, again, I think that they can be kind of like arrows for us to notice what isn't working and where we need to slow down. For me, that was my experience. Instead of thinking, oh, I'm a depressive, like identifying that way, I really just got to look at my life and go, well, I don't really want to feel like this on a day-to-day basis. What can I do to shift my life and my patterns so that I don't have to go there? But then when I start to feel it come on, I pay really close attention instead of wanting to numb it out or push it away, which we do often when things are uncomfortable.
Sure. Yeah, I notice I get overwhelmed, I get crabby, my energy goes really inward when I'm doing too much and I'm pushing too much. Also, I love to swear, but I swear even more in kind of a negative way if I'm overdoing.
Yes, I identify with that. Yeah, absolutely. Oh, if you find yourself going, whoa, did you just say that? Wow, okay. Slow it down, sister. Yeah.
Yeah. So today we're going to talk about vulnerability and authenticity. Can you tell me why that's important?
Oh my goodness. There are so many reasons why that's important. For me in my life, what's been really important to me, the focus on vulnerability in my life, and I think this goes hand in hand again with being an entrepreneur, is that if I allow myself to be vulnerable, if I allow myself to be my fully expressed self, then I don't have to hide anything from anybody. Then I can really be who I am. It's like a breath of fresh air. I can be who I am in my work life. I can be who I am in my relationship. I can be who I am with my friends, and those things all align. And then I gain trust from all those people, including my clients, right? They see me in my life, because I'm very vulnerable and very raw with my clients about just 100% of who I am. I'm not special other than just being another special human on the planet like they are.
Can you give me an example of what vulnerability looks like? I'm trying to imagine somebody listening who maybe hasn't heard a lot of talk about vulnerability or has heard it but doesn't understand what it is and some of the misconceptions. And I love using specific examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So vulnerability for me, what it looks like, and this is usually a good indicator that I know I need to get vulnerable, is I'll have something come up, even in conversation like this, Patricia, where at first I'm like, ooh, don't share that because this is going public. You know what I mean? Where it's like, oh, do I want to say that? Even when I just said, I was born into a poor family, it's like, oh my gosh, that feels really vulnerable. I mean, when I was 5 years old, I remember being excited, getting in line at the food bank, because at the food bank, you could pick out like the candy bars that you wanted. You could just eat them, like I remember being little and feeling like that was exciting. I didn't know that later on down the road when I was like 7, 8, 9, that people would look at me funny when I had my like bagged lunch at school. Like I started to put together that I was poor, but I didn't know that when I was little. I was like, ooh, this is kind of fun, So like that feels vulnerable because it's true. And yet maybe it's like, maybe somebody could judge that, or maybe I even have places inside of myself that feel less than still because I didn't have it all. I've worked for everything I have. And so it feels vulnerable because now I really do take care of myself and I live fairly financially free. I mean, I would call it that at this point for me and what I've experienced in life. So yeah, it feels vulnerable.
So allowing people to see a part of you that makes you feel what?
Uncomfortable. Maybe different, maybe even a little bit insecure, I mean, I share things sometimes with my audience where I'm like, I literally tell them, I did not want to tell you this. Uncomfortable, not ready. I'm not ready. I'm not prepared. It doesn't look polished because it isn't. Those kinds of things.
Yeah, sometimes I think of the word exposed. Not in a bad way, because we get to choose who we're vulnerable with and how much we share. But it almost reminds me of when a dog will lay on its back and expose its belly to you, that's a sign of vulnerability, where you could end up kicking the dog or stepping on the dog. I would never do that, people.
Right.
But it's the same thing that we put ourselves in a position where we expose a part of ourselves that, people could either receive very warmly or reject or criticize.
Right, absolutely. And the gift that I would say in it is connection, right? Like that's why I take the risk of being vulnerable. I think that's what's on the other side is connection and inclusion, right? Seeing that we are actually all much more similar than we are different. That's what I feel I get from it.
I'm having a hard time letting the interview be your own because I just keep wanting to pop in here. And I really just want to let you share.
I love the dialogue. I mean, you're asking amazing questions. So,
oh, well, thanks.
Thank you.
So what would you say to people why do you think people are afraid or reluctant to be vulnerable? What prevents people from being vulnerable?
I think a lot of times it is old programming. A lot of times it's limiting beliefs or cultural beliefs or programming from when we're really, really young. And we don't always know that's what's at play, right? Because a lot of those things can be unconscious, but they show up as our beliefs or as our patterns that we live by. And so there's a lot of reasons why being vulnerable hasn't worked in the past, maybe for our families or for our ancestors, for example. And we carry some of that, right? We carry some of that programming within our DNA, within our bodies. Our bodies are so highly intelligent. it's not unusual for somebody to feel too afraid to really step through that and expose themselves, as you said.
I think shame has a lot to do with it too.
Mm-hmm.
For shame to survive, it needs to be in secrecy. And often the things that we feel vulnerable about are rooted in shame, and that feeling of, if I were to let you know the voices that are going on in my head or share this with you, that you're going to reject me. Because if it's shame, shame says who I am is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really inhibits how we show up in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
And like you said, I think that that's also where connection begins. I love a story that Glennon Doyle Melton talks about when she was when her kids were young, and she went to a play group and somebody said, "So what do you think of motherhood?" And she's like, "Oh my gosh, it's just so hard, and I'm bored out of my mind, and it's frustrating." And the woman looked at her, like she had just said something that was really terribly inappropriate. And Glennon says to herself, like, I realized at that point that I'd made a big mistake. So she retracted it and smiled and says, "It's fine. It's great." They lack the ability to have that connection. But had she been with somebody who said, "Oh my gosh, I totally get it." I found being a stay-at-home mom really hard. It just was not, I'm glad I did it, and it was really challenging. But had the other person said, "Oh my gosh, I totally hear you," there would have been an opportunity for a really deep connection there.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I think shame gets in the way. I think blame, I think victimhood. There's so many scarcity, feeling like, well, if I'm honest, I'm going to be rejected. There's a lot. There's a lot of deep things, deep woundedness that we carry that can, and rightfully so, for some people, vulnerability literally has meant, being shamed out of our community or death, and I'm talking like, historically, or, I will speak to like past lives and ancestors' lives and things like that, because I do believe that we have this cycle and we're all connected, and that we come here with a lot, some of us,
I was just reading something about Brene Brown. I was trying to look through my notes quietly, but I can't find it. And what I recall her saying is that you cannot have courage without having uncertainty, emotional risk, and there was one other thing. And so I think that, we often focus on vulnerability where it's really courage, that it takes a lot of courage to be willing to show up, to take an emotional risk, to be uncertain, to not know where the conversation is going to go, and to be willing to have difficult conversations, because we're just not raised that way. We're kind of raised to be polite and kind and to not say things that can be difficult, having hard conversations.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what's so cool though is when you do step through that and you do have the difficult conversation, you have massive opportunity to shift yourself, to shift someone else's beliefs or thought patterns, and to shift the world. If we play small, or if we stay really connected to our fear and we don't allow ourselves to speak into that, whether, if it's discomfort or vulnerability or whatever, however we identify it, we can't grow. It's hard to grow from that place of, okay, I won't say anything new, or I won't say anything disturbing, because it's actually the disturbances or the disruptions that shift patterns and teach us to grow.
Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, well, as you were speaking, what I was really feeling was times in my life where somebody has, I was like, well, I don't have a particular time in mind, but, I can get very, I would say like a little bit self-righteous or really clear that I know something, right? And so when somebody comes in and says, "What about this? Have you ever thought about it this other way?" And then I stop and I go, wow, like they could be right about this. Like this is really opening my mind to something completely new. Or for example, I will give you a specific example. I was recently in a leadership program that I absolutely learned so much from. And we did a lot of work on our relationship to our mother and our relationship to our father. like in this room of 60 people, we were doing this deep healing work on our relationships to our parents. And I literally had a moment before going into it, like, I have so done this. Like, I have already healed this. You know what I mean? Like, it was so comfortable for me to be like, I don't think I'm going to get a lot out of this. And they had us do this one exercise where you were sitting in front of your perceived father. And this is where it showed up for me, where I was sitting there and I was sitting with an empty chair in front of me, but I was sensing or imagining that my father was sitting there with me. And I got to speak to my father from a place of understanding where he comes from. And it really shifted my thinking and my blame of him around our relationship. Like, I couldn't really blame him in the ways I was before that exercise, because I was like really seeing, wow, you know, like he's just a human being and he went through a lot, coming from a very large Italian Catholic family who immigrated here, you know, all these different things where I could hold the space so differently. Mm-hmm. And it shifted everything for me. You know, I really feel like I walked away like with a bit, I would say like a more expanded view of what we could be in relationship to each other now.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. We had talked about maybe talking about calling back our power. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. There's a lot of opportunity to do this. And what I'll first say about why do we even end up in a position where we have to call our power back? Like, what does that mean? So this comes from, I'm a shamanic practitioner, and it really comes from a traditional shamanic perspective where trauma or abuse or hardship, things that happen to us like one time and are really traumatic or dramatic, like say a car accident, or long-term, say, verbal abuse, can affect us in a similar way where we experience power loss or soul loss. I'm not going to talk so much about soul loss, but whether you're talking about experiencing soul loss or power loss in the shamanic term, you're talking about having experiences that have either taken something from your life force energy, and that's finite. We're here for a limited amount of time, right? So we have this amount of life force energy that's here, that is us, that makes up who we are. And when we experience hardship, that can either be taken or we can actually give it up, depending on how things happened for us. So I talk a lot with my clients about calling our power back, because we can hold ourselves as less than or powerless or victims, and it doesn't serve us long term. You know, taking that stance about yourself is limiting, it's hurtful. We're less likely to pursue really what our soul or what our heart wants out of this life if we see ourselves as powerless or as a victim of life circumstances. So when calling your power back, I mean, it can be as simple as I do a lot of energy work where I take my clients through hypnosis and shamanic journeying, and we actually go back to specific times in the past where power maybe was lost, and we call it back. We literally go back to maybe a traumatic event or something that happened, and we take the power back from that situation. We claim it back from that situation.
And can you explain, what does it mean when you say you work shamanically?
So I have been trained to work in a very shamanic, very traditional shamanic way with my clients. Shamanic just means, so all of us, many, many years ago, all of us have a lineage of coming from, and this is lifetimes ago, right? Coming from tribal communities. So thousands of years ago, even, we were all living as these tribal communities. And for many of them, there are not a lot of shamanic tribes still alive today. There are some, but not a lot. But many of these tribes, and this goes along history. Shamanism was all over the planet. If you research it, I don't want to go too much into the history, but it is something where we all have roots in this. And it's really about a community where the shamans of the community were the healers, the teachers, the medicine people, the oracles. They had a lot that they were in charge of. And the shamans were named shaman not by themselves. So it's not like you would get to a certain age in the tribe and say, I'm the shaman, everybody listen to me. Actually, the way that it was discovered is that oftentimes a young person would get really, really ill, or maybe even have like a near-death experience. And the tribe would say, well, there's our shaman. They would be then raised as this person who could literally be one foot in each world. They maybe died and came back to life, or they had a near-death experience. So they were looked at as sort of this sacred being who knows what the other side is like, and so has special healing powers for the community.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know a lot about this. I usually interact a lot more, and I think I'm just absorbing what you're saying. So I'm feeling sensitive that I'm going, oh.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to talk too much about it because I know it's its own thing. Basically, the woman that I was trained from has trained with a lot of different shamanic tribes around the world, and has basically said, okay, what are the main tools that shamans use no matter what part of the world they're in? So they haven't necessarily connected about this, but shamanism has some particular tools that every shaman uses no matter what tribe or what part of the world they're in, and that includes working with power loss and calling back power.
Interesting. Oh, well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm looking at the time, and I think we're going to shift and do some of our questions. Are you okay with that?
Of course, yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you experience as an HSP?
Some of the challenges, well, I've mentioned some. I would say that for me, I can feel sick when I am taking on too much. And what I'll add to that is that can include sort of if I lose sense of having energetic boundaries of some kind, if I'm too much involved in other people's business, because it's so natural for me to pick up on what is happening with other people. It's very easy for me to jump in and want to fix or heal or support other people. And sometimes I'm maxed out and I'm still doing that, right? And so I need to be like, okay, hold on there. That's actually a way of calling my power back. Like, call my power back, be in my own experience. I don't need to do that right now. And that's a really important thing for me to notice.
I think that's really common with HSPs too. I'm sure every one of us has been told to stay in our own lane or to mind our own business. Mm-hmm. And it's hard because we see so many things that other people just don't see. So learning when we need to step in and when we need to pull back, I think are really... It can be painful, but it can really be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. What would you say some of the corresponding strengths are to the things that you struggle with?
Well, I would say that, on the other end, I am really perceptive with people's feelings and energy. And so there have been moments in my life where, say, for example, I'm at a party and I notice that there's somebody having some kind of emotional experience. Nobody's really paid attention to them or noticed. I don't have a problem going up to a perfect stranger and saying, hey, are you doing okay? Like, just thought I'd check in. You look like there's something going on. Do you want to talk about it? And that person might go, leave me alone, stranger. Or they might say, yeah, gosh, I'd love to just sit down for a second. Do you mind listening? That happens a lot in my life. And I think that's a huge gift to the world,
Yeah, I find when I'm in groups, I do a lot of online groups too, that I can usually tell that there's one person that needs to talk or there's something going on. And I'm always kind of astounded. I forget, we're only 20% of the population, but I I'm always surprised that people don't pick up on it. And so I'm usually like, are you doing okay? Do you need to say something?
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I'm becoming most keenly aware of is how much many HSPs don't realize that the traits that we have are really unique to us and that not very many people have these traits. And so it's hard to understand like why people don't remember things or notice things or,
Mhm.
because we're a pretty small percent of the population.
Yeah, and it's so funny you say that because I really truly believe that I'm really just understanding these gifts to a fuller degree now because I think I grew up thinking there's something wrong with me, and
Mm-hmm.
B, if it's not something's wrong with me, it's doesn't everybody feel this way? Me going, doesn't everybody get this? But
Right,
no, no, they don't.
right, right. What do you do for play?
I have to work play into my life because I took on this highly sensitive role at such a young age without even knowing it that I don't think I was great at playing ever.
Me neither.
Right? So what do I do now? What I do is I time block, which doesn't sound fun at all, but I time block so that I really take time off so that I can really plan for my fun and make it a priority.
What do you do for play?
I hang out with my boyfriend. I go to the movies. He has a daughter, so we take her out hiking. We take her recently this past weekend actually. We went to Great Wolf Lodge with my niece and two nephews and stepdaughter, and they got to go run around in the water slides, which meant I got to do that. It was a great excuse for me to be like, oh, okay, I'll go down the water slide. It was so fun.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I hear that's a great place. For people that don't know what Great Wolf Lodge is, can you explain?
Well, it's a really funny place. And for a highly sensitive person, I will tell you right now, it wasn't all easy. But if you can get over being around a million people and a million children, it's like an indoor water park. And you
Mm-hmm.
stay there, and it's really about the kids. So all the kids are running around having an amazing time. And there's games and story hour and dance parties in the evening. But it's all just catered to young people. It's hilarious. Yeah.
Well, and water tends to be pretty healing for HSPs. I don't know that many HSPs know that, but water's pretty healing for us.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Can you remember something specific someone said to you about being an HSP that felt hurtful or insensitive? And I'm going to ask you to share the example.
Yeah, there's one example, and I almost don't want to say it because I still feel a little hurt by it. So this is
Mm-hmm.
me being vulnerable. There's an example of, I think it wasn't that long ago, probably 6 months ago. My partner and I had a couple over that we didn't know that well at the time. They're friends of ours, but we were just getting to know them. And we had made dinner and we were sitting together. And at one point, the two guys got up and left, went outside, and were chatting. And I was chatting with the woman. And later on, I think it was maybe a couple days later, my boyfriend kind of was talking about what they were talking about outside, and he mentioned that this new friend of ours had asked if I was a lot to be with.
Mm.
And it's so funny because that has just really, it stung. And I think it has everything to do with being a very fully emotionally expressive person.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's an example that comes to mind.
Can I ask you a couple more questions? And you cannot answer any of them.
Of course.
So, in your mind, what do you think he was saying? Like, what's the story that you made up in your head about what that means?
Right. So the story is definitely that I am like overly emotional. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can go too far. And I actually think there's something to that, and I don't say it with shame, but I can say that I can be very emotional to a point where I may take it out on other people when it's in the most extreme, you know? Mhm.
Can I ask you a question though?
Yeah.
Is it possible? I mean, this is why I love to talk about this stuff, because if you're around someone who has low emotional intelligence, and I don't mean that in a judgment, but someone who's not comfortable around feelings, we may be having a very average amount of feelings, but if you're around someone who doesn't have them and they can't own that, then they're going to make it about you.
Very true.
And so we do feel things intensely. We do feel things deeply. And I think as sensitives, often as kids, we're not validated, and we are taking in all of this stuff and we're trying to get people to see it and they don't. And so we do have this sense that we have to make things in the extreme to get people to listen to us.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I feel that for sure in this particular circumstance. You know, I of course want to own my part. And at the same time, really in this, at this particular moment when we were at dinner, I don't see that I'm not sorry, you know, for whatever he was responding to. I didn't feel that I was out of line, or I felt really comfortable with whatever I was that night, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's hard too, because you can't go in with curiosity and say, well, what does that mean to you, to get more information? Because it came to you secondhand.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and I got to have a great conversation with my partner about, well, what does that mean to you? You know, what does that mean to him that this person said it to him? Which was interesting.
Are you comfortable sharing any of that conversation? Again, I don't want to get personal.
No, I think it's good to be personal, and it's good to be vulnerable, as we've been talking about. He looked at me and shook his head in agreement a little bit with this other person. And I don't think that he felt I was that night, but I could tell in our conversation that he was like, yeah, it can be a lot. And he and I express our emotions very differently, you know, so that's part of our relationship is really talking openly about that.
Well, it can be a lot for him.
It can be a lot for him. Yeah.
If he were another HSP, he'd be like,
right.
It's fine. I get it.
Right.
And I just want to bring that up. This is not about your boyfriend. Everything is always in relationship to somebody else, but because people don't own what's going on for them, we tend to take it on and make it about us. So if you were surrounded with HSPs, that probably wouldn't have come up. So it's always relative.
No, absolutely. It is. And I'm glad you asked, because it's a perfect example. I'm sure there are people listening resonating with this.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So if you had an opportunity to talk directly to that guy, what would you want to tell him? Like, there's no right or wrong. You don't have to be polite. What would you want to say to him?
Honestly, I would just say I am unapologetically myself. I feel very comfortable being in the full expression of my feelings. I would say something like, you know, I would love to hear you take responsibility for whatever you were feeling, because I would have been very interested to have that conversation.
Sure. I'd almost be inclined to say something like, it sounds like you're really uncomfortable around people who, because this is really about him. It really has nothing to do with you, but you know, he makes it about you, and then we tend to take it on, as opposed to like, it sounds like, you know, it's really hard for you to be around people that have feelings, or it sounds like you really don't like having feelings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I would love to see people start developing the awareness that we can engage in these dialogues, that we don't, and this is not saying that you did anything wrong, but we often have these wounds and we walk away, and it's hard for us to let that stuff go, because we've gotten so much messaging about being too much, too needy, too intense, too emotional. And at the time that we got those messages, we didn't have the language or the ability to go like, well, what does that mean to you? To realize that it really has nothing to do with us. It has to do with others' capacity and being in a different place, and we're just wired differently.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being vulnerable with us. Appreciate that.
Sure.
What are some of your superpowers being an HSP?
My superpowers include a deep understanding and love for other people. So I feel like I could literally connect with anyone from, nobody goes unnoticed for me. So if I'm in a city and I walk past somebody who's asking for change or sitting in a kind of like tent or homemade, little home that they created. Like I can't ignore that, but I can say hello, or I can connect. There's a lot of connection, I'm able to connect with all kinds of people. I don't feel that there's ever a good reason why I shouldn't be able to connect with people. So what I mean by that is, even if I don't know if you've ever had that experience where you go into a restaurant or something and you see like a famous person. Like, I don't have the fame kind of like excitement in me. I might recognize somebody, but I could even just pass them and say hello like a normal person. Like it's interesting. I feel like connection, love for humanity, love for all living things. I have a very, very deep connection to all living things. So for me, I don't kill bugs, for example. Like, I will carry each little bug outside that I find in my house, because I don't see why anything that is living should have to die because of me.
Mm-hmm. What I hear you saying is that internally you have such a love and appreciation for yourself and for life that you don't put yourself in that position where either you're better than somebody who maybe doesn't have a home, or you're less than somebody who's got fame and fortune and power, that we all have what it takes to be here and to be connected. Is that an accurate reflection?
Yeah.
And if not, correct me.
No, I think you said it beautifully. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. If you could not be an HSP, but it would mean losing all of the attributes, would you want to not be an HSP?
I'm all in. Like, I don't want to be different than what I am. What I'm excited for is growth. So yeah, I never wake up going, gosh, if only I was different or I was somebody else. I do sometimes have days that are like, whoa, this does feel big, I'm feeling it all. And I remember that it all moves through me. I love what you said about water, because water for me is a big deal. Like, sometimes what I need is a shower, I need to wash the day off of me, but it all can move through us because we're energy. So I can let things go too.
Yeah. I find that when people just learn that they're an HSP, or they don't even know that they're an HSP, it just feels like everything about it is a hindrance and they don't want that. There's often an overlay of trauma from childhood as well. And then once people get a chance to work through and start seeing what some of the strengths are and owning what feels like weaknesses and seeing what the superpowers are, then people switch over to that like, heck no, I love who I am. But there are a lot of people that really, I think because of that overlay of trauma with the sensitivity, people think that it's about being sensitive that creates their problems. And I think that there are two separate things there.
I agree with that. And, I would say that even this guy that we were talking about earlier who made the comment about me, I really think could be a highly sensitive person who's just unwilling to own that, or maybe hasn't even been introduced to that being possible, for them.
Well, sensitivity in our culture is perceived so negatively, and for guys, it's even worse. Yeah. Guys get messages so early on to suck it up and be tough that it makes sense. And I think a lot of the times the people that we get harmful messages from, or that say unkind things, either have sensitivity in themselves and are rejecting it and have to reject it in you, or they were raised to reject sensitivity and so they reject it in everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything else about being an HSP that I didn't ask you that you want to talk about?
Oh gosh, something came up earlier. Oh, I was just going to mention intuition. I think that I feel really like that is a gift that I have. And I think it's unusual for people to be as tapped into their intuition as I am. But I think for HSPs, it probably is like one of our superpowers.
I think so too. And my guess is that we tune into so many different things, and because we're so alert and perceptive, I find it happens a lot with my clients and with friends when they're talking about what's going on with them, because that's fascinating to me, that I often just intuitively feel like I know what I need to say about it. And it's not always, I think, what people want to hear.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm very kind, but like the ability to just kind of be a truth teller.
Yes, that is it. That's what we get to own, is being a truth teller. And I think sometimes I mentioned the word disruptor earlier, and I don't really identify with, like, I'm not going through life finding where I need to disrupt everything, but it can be that, it can serve in actually a really beautiful way if I just really say the truth. Sometimes I notice that it disrupts someone in a really good way where they go, oh my gosh, you're right. I never thought of it like that, and that can be helpful when that happens on my end, when I have an HSP that I'm speaking to and they're disrupting my thought pattern. And I'm like, whoa, thank you for boldly saying that, because you didn't have to. Like, that might have been uncomfortable for you to share. And yet I can really shift now,
Right. And an example for me, of being a truth teller, because I think that people have everybody has a different idea that comes to mind. And I'm not talking about your outfit looks terrible, why'd you dye your hair that color? That is absolutely not what I'm talking about. But I was talking to a friend who's a mom the other day, and she was feeling kind of put out because her kids were having needs and she just wanted to take off and needed some time for herself. And the reflection was, it's really hard for us to set limits and to make ourselves a priority. And when we don't allow ourselves to have needs, we end up feeling irritated at the people around us that have needs because we're not taking care of our own needs. Mm-hmm. That would be an example of being a truth teller. It's not, what are you wearing that for?
For sure. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. So tell us about your projects and where people can find you, and where are you located?
I live in northern Washington State in the U.S. I live up near the San Juan Islands, the Canadian border here. It's beautiful. I live rurally, and that's actually been huge as an HSP to live away from the city. I've lived in a lot of cities. This is really nice to live more in the country. I have a website. It's ChristinaMiglino.com. It talks a lot about the work that I do. Right now, I just see clients online. So I have a one-on-one mentorship program where I mentor a couple people every year. And we just do Zoom calls where I'm meeting with them twice a month through Zoom. So I work with people all over the world. And I also am launching a group program, and it's fun, Patricia, because it's called The Sea Within, because of intuition, because water is so healing. We're going to be working a lot with our intuition and tapping into where our own intuition is meeting like higher guidance, our inner wisdom, and how we can create from that place of really connecting inward. And that's what I'm about right now.
Sounds great. And I'll put links in the show notes to everything that you told us about.
Thank you.
Is there anything else before we go?
All I would leave your audience with is to be bold, own these superpowers, to be unapologetic about it, and to move forward in action with these gifts, whatever that looks like, whether it is being a mom and learning how to take care of yourself, or whether it's starting a business and maybe working with clients. I have lots of HSP clients. Do what your heart really desires, despite some of these old messages that we might still get sometimes, knowing that you really have a beautiful gift to share with the world.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Christina, thank you so much for being with us today. I love talking to you.
I love talking to you. It was such a pleasure. Really. Thank you, Patricia.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much for being here with me today. I really appreciate it. If you want to get any information about the show, the easiest thing to do is to go to unapologeticallysensitive.com. You can find the episode you're interested in and click on it, and the show notes will be there. If you want to get in touch with me, my email address is there as well. We have a Facebook community by the same name, Unapologetically Sensitive. I would love to have you join. It's a place where I'm hoping that we can connect. I can get to know you and get a sense of what content you're looking for, how I can help you and be of service. Please remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.